Welcome back. This is Cheche, live on Citizen TV, with today's guests, both from civil society, Dr. Mshai Wangola, Chair of the Uraia Board, and Irungu Houston, Associate Director of the Kenya Dialogues Project of the Society for International Development. We've been looking ahead to President Kenyatta's State of the Nation address tomorrow in Parliament. And unfortunately, the feedback from you has been despairing. Here's some examples. Which nation will President Kenyatta be giving the speech to? We're all frustrated and demoralized. Politicians are all the same. When elected, they change abruptly. We have lost hope completely in our government, which is exclusive and insensitive to our needs. I expect to hear how much is achieved in nation building as opposed to PR exercises on purported achievements. And this is the same tone when I went into the feedback earlier. So in terms of changing how people feel, we've talked about expecting from the President's speech to hear him address cohesion. Because we all accept that, the tensions pulling us apart. We expect him to address corruption. But this general sense of malaise, how do we correct that? Can the President correct that?
Maybe I can kick off a little bit. I think there are probably two things I would start off with. The first is that I would really like to see all the leaders of political parties do their State of the Nation addresses. Now obviously there is only one president, but I think what would be interesting is a political culture that allows for different political parties to say what would be in their presidential speech. So I would like to see CORD, Third Way, Democratic Congress, and all the political parties that are out there actually have their own parallel processes. And that way Kenyans can make informed choices about, is there an alternative leadership out there? That's the first one. The second one, I think, would be for the president to speak to not so much what they've done, but how the way they are doing business is changing. We don't see enough, and we didn't see this when the cabinet secretaries went to KICC and when the deputy president spoke yesterday, in the way of doing business. And some things that I'm very fond of. For example, the idea of town hall meetings, the idea of public conversations. This should really be embedded in the Jubilee government's way of working. It should not really be a one-off. So I think that's the first thing. So I'd like to just congratulate those that actually set up those meetings, and there could have been a lot more gained from those meetings. They were really great initiatives. The second one is really where you see cabinet secretaries or principal secretaries actually going to the ground to speak to Kenyans about the portfolios that they hold. Matiangi showing up at schools unannounced and asking questions. Now, or Karanja Kibicho actually going and talking to chiefs and basically, I guess what you call leading the troops from the front. Now, there have been criticism about, the tone, whether they needed to do that. Maybe they're so high that they don't need to do that. But I think actually the culture of opening, listening government is actually what we need in this country. So I think there are many more, but I think those two, for me, would be the starting points.
Mshai? I was reflecting on the whole question of the Constitution, and I was looking through my notes. The first thing that the President said, and I want to quote this directly, where he said, "The Constitution in itself is all that we need. The values it enshrines and which we make our own spare us from the temptations of corruption and despair." And that came to mind because you talked about this culture of despair. And so I'm going to go back to the thing I keep saying. Let's go back to the Constitution. I'd like us to pay attention to the preamble, which hardly anybody ever looks at, and to chapters 1, 2, those foundational chapters that are about who we are. One thing I really, really liked is that we have now said every year we're going to do an annual report looking at national values and so on. I want us to go back and make that not just a litany of which ministry has done what, but to actually start to reflect on what are our national values. What does it mean to a child who is in school or in high school or to me in my office? To make that a conversation that we start to go back and to say, do Kenyans actually have values? And beyond what is in the Constitution, are there other values? The Baraza Commission, for example, they listed a whole other list, and then they said we need to think about these things. I'd love to see us go back to the CKRC archives. In the last few days I've seen a couple of calls on social media saying we need a constitutional conference, we need a sovereign conference. And I think if we go back to what the CKRC, the Constitutional Commission, did, was they went all around the country and people had conversations. And then we took those conversations and put them in the National Archives. And I would love to see the president get a team of people, and especially young people, who then went through those archives and began to look at what is it that people said beyond the law. What is it that people were saying? So that when we talk about a national conversation, heading towards an election, which everybody looks at, everybody says will be very divided, we're beginning to look at, are there things that actually bring us together as opposed to the things that divide us? I remember reading one of the CKRC archives. They went and they were talking about a people called the Munyoyaya, whom hardly any Kenyans know, who are the people of peace. And the story goes that their tradition is that if you come to fight with them, they let you have whatever you want. They would rather lose their material things, and that's not to tell Kenyans to go and take their material things, but they value peace so much that there's a legend that their children will swim among the crocodiles. And I've had people who say, we've seen it with our own eyes, and the crocodiles will not touch Munyoyaya children. And I've had somebody who said, I didn't believe it, I went there and I saw it. And then begin to bring out those things and to say, these are values that we should espouse. Instead, we celebrate people who fight. We talk about ourselves as a fighting nation. And I think if we were able to go back and start to have those conversations about the best of us, not the worst of us, about bringing young people together. We did this with the IEA, Institute of Economic Affairs. And we went round with Katindi Sivinjonjo and talked to young people across the nation. And the first time in each of the 8 provinces, it was like 8 stories of 8 different Kenyans. But when we brought them together, I saw 20 young people beginning to listen to each other, beginning to listen to the concerns of the young man from Lamu who said, we are ready to secede. And beginning to say, okay, talk to us about what your issues are. Not to say that we will solve them tomorrow, but at least we're listening to you, we're respecting what we're saying, without being defensive, without fighting you. People began to listen to young people from Central Province who said, we're the most marginalized in this country. And I saw everybody around the room say Central Province. And then they began to pour out what they're dealing with. And people began to get a different sense that they are like me. They're not different, they're not the other, they're not rich, they're not powerful, they're just like me. So that's what I would like to see, is the president sitting down and saying, let's go back to what made us a nation, let's make this the focus of the next year, and let's engage people in different places around that.
Okay, I'll treat those as your final thoughts and come to the panelists. Do you think that what our guests are suggesting, the solutions they're offering, the interventions they're suggesting the president incorporate as he addresses the nation, are those feasible? Can they turn the tide of despair?
Yes. Yesterday we had the gentleman who is in charge of the Institute of Curriculum Development. He had very good things to say about the new curriculum, which they are launching today, or they're deciding today about it. And some of the things he told me which are very impressive is that we are not going to have a situation where students fail. That every child has a talent. That we can incorporate all these things about chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 6 in learning processes, by the way we think, by the way we train our teachers, by the way as parents treat and regard our children. So there is hope. I cannot say that because of poor leadership we cannot change. We must change because we have no choice. I don't want to go this way of balkanization. Like you said, it's like birth. Like you explained, it's about birth, not marriage. When you bring up a child, we are brought up 63. How have we been growing? We've been raising our children so that they can smoke bangi. We must change so that we give them milk and butter, not bangi.
Well,
probably allow me to just to add something that EACC has been doing, but Kenyans have ignored on the issue of integrity, because we are talking about corruption, and I hope the president will address the issue of increasing more funds to EACC so that we can educate Kenyans on the issues of integrity. Why don't we start integrity clubs in our schools? Why don't we start integrity clubs in our higher institutions of learning, so that because these institutions are like a bank. This is where we are going to get our leaders from. If we are training kids who are already so corrupt because they did actually steal in an exam or copy in an exam, then we are going to have bad leadership. I think we need to address the issue of rather than asking ICC to arrest and charge people, CG investigate, why don't we invest in teaching people on issues to do with integrity in our institutions? And EACC has been doing that. And I know a lady called Purity Gitonga. They have been doing a good job in the ICC as far as that is concerned. So we need also to address some of these issues rather than just dealing with reactive things. Because if you listen to the state of address by the president tomorrow and what the deputy president was doing, it may just be like reading what he read last year, you know. Because
but it isn't quite. I mean, I've got the list of achievements he made, but what was interesting is that while he was, you know, trotting out these figures, you know, for what they had achieved, if you followed the chatter on social media, even in the papers, it seemed that there was a presentation of a Kenya that was very different from the Kenya that ordinary citizens are experiencing, and so that disconnect, you know, and that goes back to the conversation about Wanjiku. You know, Wanjiku's Kenya, and you know, the governments and leaders Kenya.
Dr. Mongol has put it so well that let the president or the deputy president come and tell us, SGR, we had said from Naivasha to this place, this is where how the far we have gone. You know, you are just accounting. You are given a check of 1 million shillings. You are just being asked, account for it. You are not being called a thief. You know, tell us how much you have spent, how much is remaining, and what you intend to do with the remaining money, and whether you require more money. What does the contract look like? Exactly.
I mean, I think there's two things I'll be looking for tomorrow in the speech. The first is two values. First of all, the speech is really a speech that speaks to issues of values. It's not really an opportunity to list achievements in terms of projects, and there is a space for that, and I think, you know, he can't avoid it because people will want to show, they want to discuss the results of the last year. But there are two things. The first is, for me, the concept or the value of command responsibility. Now, there is a part of this country that doesn't think any good will come out of the International Criminal Court. But over the last couple of weeks, there has been a conviction of Jean-Pierre Bemba. Now, you may think I'm going very far on this issue.
In the DRC.
In the DRC. And the conviction was largely based, first of all, it was the first time that we've seen sexual and gender-based violence being made prominent. So it's really important in terms of that. But the second thing is that he was actually convicted on the inability to rein in his subordinates. And that the actions that they took created the human rights violations or whatever. Now, where am I coming to with this? The concept of command responsibility is really important for Kenya, and we saw a glimmer of this in the way that the Kenya National Examination Council was dealt with. That the seniors knew that the corruption and the leakage was happening, but took no action to stop it. So the first thing I would like to see in the conversation tomorrow, in the speech by the president, is really an affirmation of the value of command responsibility, that I am, as the commander-in-chief, responsible, completely 100% responsible for the conduct of all my civil service.
But the contrary is happening. If you know that the perception of Kenya is that the president protects those who are corrupt.
I think that will not inspire Kenyans. The second area, just to come to the second one, is really a olive leaf or a way forward, a breakthrough in the institutional crisis that is looming with the elections. And you talked about IEBC funding and so on, but there are other issues. I think we need to see some forward-looking thinking around how can we get the political leadership of this country together to agree on the rules and the framework for the political contestation we call general elections. Those two things, if they're in the speech, I would leave very happy.
There is a proposal to set up an IPPG.
Okay. All right, we have to end the show now, but what we can do is we'll invite you to carry on the conversation, responding to the suggestions you've heard for the President's State of the Nation address tomorrow. Our Twitter handle, well, hashtag actually, is Cheche, and the SMS number, if you want to continue sending your messages in, is 22422. So our time is up. Our thanks to our guests, Dr. Mushai Mwangola of Uraia and Irungu Houghton of the Society for International Development. Our thanks also to our panelists, Mutegi Njau and Bulweru Bulu. Thank you for engaging with us on this conversation. My name is Udwa Kamimo. We'll see you next week.